Okay, well, I want to welcome everybody. I think we're ready to go here for our fifth and final session on T-cell lymphoma. We're going to take a little bit of a departure here and talk about career development, professional development today. And first of all, I'd like to thank MSD and Roche for sponsoring all of this series, and we really appreciate that. So today we're going to have a few kind of interviews or panel discussions regarding how several people have made their way along a unusual path, perhaps in some cases, to try to get to the top of the lymphoma world. So I'm going to interview Dr. Soni Smith, who's the Elmwood V. Jensen Professor of Medicine and Chief of the Section of Hematology Oncology at University of Chicago. And then we're also going to kind of interact with Carrie Thompson, Program Director, Department of Internal Medicine, Mayo Clinic. And she's going to interview and interact with Judith Trotman from Concord Repatriation General Hospital, is that right? Sydney, Australia. And we're going to kind of ask each other some questions and try to help other people get to the top on the professional development ladder, shall we say. So first of all, let me start with Soni. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about mentorship, because I think that's one of the biggest things that can be helpful to everybody at any stage of their career. And just wondered sort of how you got started early in finding mentors along the way, and just describe kind of maybe female versus male mentors, and how you have had mentorship from various people at various different time points in your career.
Yeah, so first of all, let me just say it is so fun and such an honor to be having this conversation with you in particular, since you are one of my role models. But, you know, the challenge, I think, for me, and maybe this is something that a lot of people have, is that when I first started my career, I didn't have very many internal mentors. There really wasn't a lymphoma program at my institution at the time. The previous version of it had sort of dissolved over a few years. And so I found myself a little bit lost, doing a lot of leukemia, working with Dr. Larson, who was a wonderful mentor in leukemia, but not specifically in lymphoma. So it was really looking for external mentors in this field. And I will say that the cooperative group helped me tremendously, as did ASCO and ASH. And you know, that was really the way to open the doors to meet people outside. It was really an issue of creating and culling a mentorship group, if you will, rather than I didn't have that single mentor who kind of paved the way. I don't know if I'm the only one like that, but that was certainly, it took a lot of initiative to, you know, well, I'll tell you, it took two things. One was I had some people open the door for me into certain groups, and then it took sort of walking through that door and finding the people who would eventually become my mentors.
Yeah, I think mentorship is so important. I think I was rather lucky in that I had a lot of good mentorship at my institution, and so got a good early start with Dr. Jim Armitage helping me, and also the lymphoma group in general. And so, and thankfully, in some ways, I had it a little bit easier there. But you have to open doors at many locations. And I think professional development through our professional societies has been fabulous. And that certainly has helped me and many other people as well. So I think that's one thing, to get involved in committees or assignments, or, you know, however you can with professional societies, I think is one big way to look for outside mentors as well. I know, Carrie, you were kind of nodding your head quite a bit. Do you have things to say about mentorship that you guys would like to talk about?
I think mentorship is so key throughout the whole career, not just junior faculty, but certainly the mid-career, and then you know, when you become later in career, being a mentor to others can be such a fulfilling part of a career and giving back. So I want to throw the question to Judith, who is outside of the US and has had a really interesting path, and would love to share maybe a little bit about your path to where you are now, and how you have found your way, who has mentored you along the way, And I guess any parts that were particularly challenging for you? You're on mute, Judith. There you go.
Unmute. Hello. Can you hear me? Sorry. Thanks
Yes.
very much, Carrie. There's a lot of questions there. It's interesting what Soni was saying, because I've had the same sort of experience probably for the first certainly 5 to 10 years of my career, where I really lacked mentors early. And I'm not entirely sure why. I still think back and wonder why. And perhaps, I'm just not sure, but maybe it's because I had too many children that I wasn't perceived as being someone who was academically inclined. But certainly at a local level, like Soni, our department was very, very small. No one knew really about Concord hematology in Australia, let alone in the world. And I had this wonderful co-mentoring partnership with my colleague and then head of department, and now I'm her head of department, Alona Cunningham. And in the early years, it was pretty much sort of the two of us really building this under-resourced hematology service and recruiting the talent to grow the unit. And we had a particular focus on our clinical trials because of the explosion of exciting new therapies that came. And I think with Alona, we had this really honest, very frank, very trusting relationship, and we obviously had the shared purpose and vision, and really, really enjoyed working together. And so we were able to, appeal, to people who wanted to be sort of part of our startup. And in some ways, it was almost easier building up something than it is now sort of staying on top as a sort of a leading clinical trials institution. So at a local level, every day I thank and I'm very grateful for having worked with Alona. I think most influential for me as a mentor globally in terms of enabling me to sort of, focus not just on my own patients, but thinking about, what small thing can I do for patients outside of, my institution. The mentor in follicular lymphoma management was clearly Gilles Salle at Hôpital Lyon Sud. And back in 2007, when I proposed, I went over there for a year sabbatical and took my family over there. It was interesting because Gilles didn't see a lot of value in PET and follicular lymphoma, and he hadn't done any in his prima trial patients. But I said, that's okay. I'm okay if the answer's negative. I just want to ask the question and come over and immerse myself in your fabulous clinical trials unit and in the GILA research, the cooperative group, as Lisa was then called. And he and Bertrand Coiffier were really generous to me in allowing me to immerse myself in their service and the activities of GILA. But it was really interesting because I'd been a hematologist for 10 years then, and then I went back and I really wanted to get the full French experience. So I went back as an FFE, as an intern, the most junior doctor on the team. And to this day, I am forever grateful to Florence Broussaille, who was, a fellow at the time, who really took me under her wing and supported me. And, she was a wonderful co-mentor. So I think there's, mentoring goes up and down each way. The people I mentor now, they, introduce me to the most amazing out-of-the-box, digital ideas that, are different ways of doing research, which is exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. There's mentoring up and mentoring down and mentoring sideways and mentoring every way, because we have to look in all directions for opportunities. And certainly many of us have more opportunities than we can take advantage of. So those are good things to give away to younger people and to help them with that. Now, interestingly, most of the early mentors we talked about were men. Do you see any difference in men mentors versus women mentors or women?
I think men, first of all, there's so many men who have been supportive and open doors. And from my personal journey, I think it's been more men who have been sponsors. They put my name in the hat for something, or they might open a door, more so than it has been sort of the mentoring where you sit down and go through life goals or project goals or, anything like that. So, I'm sure there's all different kinds of versions of between men and women, but for me personally, it seems that men have had more of the roles and power, and they're the ones who have been able to see energy or commitment from me or from other people who were at my level at the time, that they supported us just by opening the door, really.
Yeah, I think, just in the past, that's kind of who was in power. So that's, who we had to mentor us. But hopefully going forward, we'll be able to change that dynamic somewhat. So,
I
and
think cross countries is useful too.
mhm.
I think that, I had amazing mentors and men who opened the door, like, not just Shield, but also Massimo Federico in Italy and Stefano Luminari, who worked with us in collaboration. Getting the Italians and the French together in collaboration, I think that was pretty cool. And Peter Johnson was and John Radford were so supportive of this Australian who they didn't know, coming and joining in their Hodgkin's studies.
Well, you just have a way, Judith. That's it.
I know, just luck.
Walking
There's a
all
lot of
over.
opportunism, isn't there? I just met Peter and John on the train station at Lugano rail station after the Lugano meeting. There's a lot of opportunities that just present, aren't there?
But one of the things that I find is that a lot of times there's opportunities in front, and I see this with a lot of the younger women that are, in my section, or maybe I know through SWOG or other, places where there's an opportunity there, but there's fear about taking that opportunity, or hesitancy or concern. And, it's sometimes me like not forcing, but really nudging, somebody to not leave an opportunity. It's really been an interesting, experience to see that, because I don't know if I grabbed everything that came my way, but I think I grabbed just about everything.
And do you think, Soni, it's because people they're waiting for the perfect opportunity and the perfect time, and been able to say, people, I think sometimes women are a bit nervous.
Or do you think it's a bit of,
I think it's the imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Saying, I'm not good enough to do this, and they can't see the total value. And I'd say I'm sometimes guilty of that too, but I think the younger women are definitely guilty of that. Whereas it's always interesting. I'm in charge of a lot of faculty, so I see really interesting differences in men and women and how they approach things. Everything compared to men faculty versus women faculty, and they men push things to the limit. They go after things, are very aggressive, and most of the women are not. And it's just a very interesting. I'm going to write a book about it someday. In all my spare time.
In all your spare time. No, I agree. I think imposter syndrome is part of it. But the other piece that I've noticed is that, there is almost a fear of commitment, like that that a person will take a certain project or go down a certain path, and that it will box them in a way. I don't know if anybody else has seen this, but it's like a worry that if they go down this path or they stay in academics, that they won't be able to have a life that's balanced. I don't know. I think that is part of the perception and the fear that keeps women from really keeping a stake in academics.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I think that, the advice of say no to opportunities and focus on what you want to do almost has gone a bit too far with some of the junior faculty, where, if you say no and not be flexible with opportunities, you may be closing, too many doors in terms of networking and really experiencing different opportunities to learn what is going to be a passion or may not be a passion, or something that may lead to something down the road.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that, that's where a mentor can actually help sort through the opportunities. And if you don't have that, then, or if you're worried about, I don't know, offending your mentor, that's why you need a team of people, really, because everybody gives you different perspectives.
Yeah,
And
and I
there's
mean,
that tension, isn't there, between wanting to grab the opportunity, but also wanting to do something that you really want to do. Because if you're going to end up committing 5 years to it, you know, it's got a job or be something you're pretty passionate about. But you know what? I think there's lots of things you can be passionate about. You can sort of, you know, almost learn to be passionate about the more you learn about something. There's not just one thing out there waiting for us.
There's
yeah.
a question in the chat. I don't know if you see that, Julie. Kind of, I don't know.
Oh, question. Well, I guess let's get to the questions a little bit later. Let's kind of continue our chat here.
Mhm.
So, oops, sorry, my lights went out. We've been talking a little bit about kind of how to balance family and, you know, husbands and children, and nobody does that better than Soni. So I want to hear your magic potion here of how to do that.
Well, I don't know if there's a magic potion, but for everyone else, I have 4 children. And my first child I had when I was 28, and he is developmentally disabled. He has something called Williams syndrome, which is a lot like Down syndrome, but just it's a random microdeletion of the elastin gene. So it has this whole spectrum of abilities and disabilities, I would say. So we were both residents at the time. We waited 5 years before we had another child, and then we had 3 within 4 years. So it was, you know, it's been, I will say that the balance in the beginning was that I had to let go of certain things. I had to let go of opportunities. I did not, you know, ever get a career development award. I applied for the ASCO Leadership Award, didn't get it. You know, it was in its first or second year back then too. It was a long time ago, and it was really hard, you know, to see my peers and people who were graduating after me sort of soar past me. And so, you know, I think that what helped me the most, and I apologize to any of you who have heard this before, but there's Janet Rowley who, you know, won the Lasker Award, and, you know, was one of she really pioneered cancer cytogenetics and discovered the 922 rearrangement. She also had 4 children. And her story would always inspire me because she left medicine when she finished medical school and came back at the age of 40. And every contribution she has had to science, to medicine, came between the ages of 40 and 90. And she kept her lab going until she passed away. So, you know, I would use her experience and say, okay, I can delay for a little bit. I won't leave. I didn't want to leave. I wanted more than anything to stay in academics. So I did whatever I could to stay, which was a lot of clinical care. You know, when my kids were a little bit older and we were out of the double stroller, we, you know, slowly things started to get back together. But I kept the long view in mind, you know, and just to say that, you know, maybe when I am, you know, 10 years, 20 years down the road, I can look back and say, this was wonderful. At the time, it was really hard. But Dr. Rowley inspired me, and my husband really helped. My husband is a great partner. And we had a lot of division of labor, which was great. And we decided we would spend every penny on childcare. So we didn't take fancy vacations. We don't have fancy cars. At the time, we did not have a nice house. You know, so we decided that all of our money would go towards delegating, not taking care of the children per se, but the grunt work of it, you know, the laundry, the dishes, the cooking, the grocery shopping, the dry cleaning, all of those things we really spent our money and delegated on that. And, you know, at this point now in my 50s, you know, I can look back and say, you know, it was absolutely worth it. But it took all of those people. It took the nannies, it took my husband, it took that vision that success is defined in the long run, that kept me going.
Well, thanks for sharing. That's amazing. And I can hardly take care of myself, let alone all those other people. So I've always been amazed at you. But Judith, it sounds like you had the same kind of situation.
Soni, my biggest regret is we didn't spend enough money on the problem of too many children. I think for me, it's taken years to dump the maternal guilt, and it probably only ever goes when your children are old enough to be adults and no longer as sort of dependent on you. And that guilt is often so unjustified, absolutely unjustified. And like you know, I had this really, what I thought was a balanced, others might thought be imbalanced, but a balanced partnership with my husband, who particularly in the later years has done a lot more domestic work than me. And he gets very embarrassed about me touting his domestic skills. But he really shouldn't be unique. You know, every partner should be like your husband, Soni, and mine. You know, that we should be in this shared, shared work roles at home. I think the hardest thing, you know, I'd hear about how hard it must have been those first 5 years with your eldest son. Was it your eldest son? Yeah. With all his, you know, special needs. For me, it was very hard becoming an instant mum of 3 children, had their own sort of special need because they were still grieving their own mother, who had died a year earlier, just a bit over a year earlier of carcinoma. And I became an instant mum while I was doing my physician's exams. And I know my own parents were terrified that it was all just going to go by the wayside, you know, because they were pretty passionate about me doing medicine. But then sort of 8 years later, I think the hardest time was probably having my eldest child doing her final year exams, having 2 testosterone-fueled teenagers and a toddler and 2 babies. And when you mentioned that twin pram, it just, the thoughts of so many terrible events that have happened in those twin pram, like leaving the pram at the supermarket because I was on the phone to a consult and walked away from the kids in front of the checkout counter and get to the car and realize, oh, I haven't got my children, you know, or them upturning, you know, pink cleaning fluid onto the floor and me ignoring them because I'm begging the head of the drug committee for some Velcade for, you know, a young woman who was my age. You know, there are so many memories each one can have of the juggle, particularly when your children are very little and you're trying to keep yourself in the workforce.
Passes, right? And eventually they grow up and you miss, you know, and I think if I had a message for some of the young moms, you know, and I have a lot of young moms in my section, it is that, you know, as hard as it is, there's so much joy and, you know, a little bit of is compartmentalization, right? So to enjoy the time when you're with your children and to be, and I've done all of that. I have locked my child in the car by accident. I've done different things like that, but you know, all of that happens and then eventually they grow. And maybe I'm just feeling that I've seen too many younger women with children leave academics or leave this passion. And I just want to say that you can gather your support. It will pass. You know?
Yeah, and being a good enough mum is being a great mum.
Yeah.
You know, I constantly, when I went through all the guilt, I'd constantly say to my boys, oh, I'm sorry I wasn't there for this, for you know, your school presentation or whatever, although I made sure I was there for every rugby game. But you know, they just love you for who you are, and they really appreciate the contributions that you made outside of the family. Yeah, I make my boys come to volunteer at a Bloody Great Night Out, which is our fundraiser for our clinical trials unit, because I love the fact that then all the patients, you know, descend on them because they look like me and say, oh, your mum's so lovely and kind and, you know, saved my life and all that sort of thing. I thought, yes, good. You know, they can think about that next time I haven't made their lunch or haven't, you know, been there for them all the time. And I also had the great joy of, my last 3 were boys, And you know, this adolescent psychologist says the mum has to butt out, and the dad needs to, you know, get involved when boys are teenagers. And I said, right, that's it, Stephen, it's over to you now.
Got it. I love hearing
Carrie, I think I'm going to turn over to you to ask some questions.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to both of you for sharing your stories of being a mom and a physician, because I think it's so helpful for others to hear, normalizing the struggle, but then looking at the two of you who have had such successful careers. It's inspiring, I think, to many to know that, you know, this is possible. And it is a long career. It doesn't need to all happen at, you know, in your first 3 years on faculty. So, Judith, I want to ask you the question, the founder of Women in Lymphoma several years ago. Why did you decide to start Women in Lymphoma? What was your thought process, and why do you think it's important for women to have groups like this?
Well, Women in Lymphoma was sort of an unplanned example of Twitter as a catalyst, really. And it was really my email response to seeing a manel advertised at Lugano. And, you know, they were all men who I really respected and worked for. But I thought, well, you know, where are the women? And I sent an email to 12 women who I didn't really know that well, but you know, on my email address book, and women who I really admired globally. And suddenly I ended up with, you know, 120 replies. So I thought, oh, here's an unmet need in medicine. So we had our first meetings. I think Soni, didn't you, or I can't remember who, was it you, Carrie, who organized a meeting at ASCO? And then we had a meeting at Lugano. And I vividly remember 10 minutes before the meeting, I'd got this agenda and I thought I better print out a dozen agendas to pass around. And 70 women turned up. And remember, we were all sitting around the outsides against the wall because there was sort of not enough seats in the basement there. So that was pretty amazing sort of first start that sort of made me think, oh, this is something we really need to do. And then we got the steering committee together of this group of women who I think were at the stage of their careers. You know, I couldn't have done WIL even 10 years ago. You know, we were all at the sort of stage of our careers where we felt comfortable in, you know, in challenging the status quo, because it is, you know, what we're doing is challenging and is a bit uncomfortable for some people. You know, championing productive diversity and pointing out what are some pretty sobering metrics in hematology and you know, with our particular focus on lymphoma. And we knew we really needed the metrics to speak a language that our male colleagues would be comfortable with. And right at the, you know, the very beginning, and I can sort of talk a bit about the mission of WIL later, but, you know, in terms of sort of to metrics, I remember I got an email from a young British colleague, and she had pointed out, I hadn't even noticed it. She pointed out that the European School of Hematology, you know, how to diagnose and treat lymphoma series, had 41 out of 42 of the speakers were male. And, you know, I'd looked at the program, I thought, what a great program. And I hadn't noticed myself the, you know, phenomenal imbalance. And so we wrote to the school because, you know, we thought here was a clear example of, you know, what I would say was an egregious imbalance, because women do so much of the undergraduate and postgraduate teaching throughout the world. And nothing changed. There wasn't even a single extra woman added to the program. So, and I just thought, well, why don't we have our own free education series? We've got all this, you know, amazing talent around the world, all this, you know, up-to-date current knowledge within our own membership. And that's how that was the catalyst to WiLing Wednesday series. And I remember Soni being just so excited. It was very stressful setting up my first ever webinar, Zoom webinar. But, you know, when you spoke and there were 86 women online listening to your inaugural presentation on diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, I was just absolutely taken away. But so the education is just sort of one aspect of what we want to do to increase the visibility of women out there who do so much in teaching and education. And we really want to sort of inspire and empower women in lymphoma care and teaching, and in particular in research, because I think leadership in research roles is something that we're missing out. And it's not just a social justice thing to do. It's about being productive, and if we're not having, this talented pool of lymphoma researchers, able to be at the top of their game, then, lymphoma patients around the world are missing out. So, Soni, what do you think? What are your thoughts? And Julie?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is so incredibly important. And for you to have struck such a nerve at the right time where everybody really aligned, I think is just absolutely perfect. And I'm really grateful to this group for, putting a light on this, and then also for all the friendship and camaraderie that we've had. But I will say, like, the piece about Will that is incredible. One is we're going to do better than ESH or whatever else is out there. We have an incredible talent pool. But the other piece is that if you don't see it, you can't be it, right? And so I hope that by doing this, there are role models. I know there are role models that will help, just make sure that there's no tolerance for this type of imbalance, for one thing, but two, to really empower our group. And, Julie started out asking about mentors, and, I had used the word role model. And Julie, you are one of my role models. And I still remember, going to my very first Pan Pacific when I was still like, I think it was 2003. And, you stood up and asked a question in the middle of the room wearing pink. And Sandra Horning was there and she was wearing red. And, and Nancy Bartlett, I can't remember if she was at that meeting or a different meeting, but the women who have always stood up in the room are like Nancy and you and Ranjana and, Sandra Horning and, and Stephanie Gregory. And I just remember, like, wow, like this is a room full of 80 to 90% men. And to stand up at that podium, I mean, you were a role model. So I could see it, that's what I wanted to do.
Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you. But you're right. If we don't show people what talent there is, how can you learn? How can the next generation learn? So you have to, be able to get up there and work to be able to do that. And I think, thankfully, the series has definitely been so beneficial, hopefully, to a lot of people. So there are a couple questions in the chat. Maybe we should ask too. So there was a question about how can translational investigators and laboratory-based investigators get additional mentorship in the area of lymphoma. So none of us kind of do that, but I'm sure there must be some suggestions for those folks that do a little bit more of a laboratory-based research.
Yeah, I think that this is a really incredible area of need. And, in our institution, we actually just had a diversity and inclusion type of retreat, but a big portion of it was also for, increasing women in science. So, not knowing the institution, I think it's really important to seek out if there are women's groups there, and if not, create one. I mean, it's just really important to, have your community set up.
You do need to have support at various different levels, though, because if you don't have support, it's really hard to get that emphasis going. Thankfully, more and more it's being recognized, I think, at many institutions and many hospitals and other places that this is really an improvement and develops a richness that you can see. I mean, there's lots of data that women on boards, for example, really improve the not only the diversity, but improve the functionality of boards. And I think that's true across what we do as well. So.
I'm a TED Talk junkie, and there's one by Madeleine Albright who talked about when she first joined the United Nations and realized how she was outnumbered, from men to women. And so she discusses in this TED Talk how she formed a caucus of women and how it really changed the world. I mean, it's really a beautiful TED Talk if anyone has time to go listen to that. She's amazing.
That's great.
I want to go back too to something Soni said earlier about finding mentors outside your institution or outside of your lab group or what have you. There's lots of individuals who can help in ways that, you know, you may not even be aware of. And being open to those connections can sometimes be the most rich mentoring experiences.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's also where, you know, the pandemic has probably been particularly hard for people because a lot of mentorship, at least, you know, and I would be really interested to hear from the three of you, you know, a lot of mentorship for me that's been peer mentorship has been because of sort of casual or informal, you know, you're there at a meeting and people gather, you know, you go to a restaurant or you go to a bar and you talk and you realize that you share common struggles with somebody across the country or somebody across the world or somebody who doesn't, you know, look like you or, you know, have the same background, but you have similar, you know, challenges. And so hopefully
This
the
one is
pandemic,
better.
you know, will fade to the point where we can resume some of those things.
Which is the left one, right?
Oh,
This one?
Paola, can you mute your phone, please? Thank you. Yeah, I think you're right. That's one of the big things I've really missed is being able to interact with all my fun friends from around the world. And that's a strange way that I love Zoom because now I get to sort of interact with people I've missed so much during this time. And hopefully we'll get back together soon. In Hawaii, hopefully.
Yes, in Hawaii.
Yeah. Let's see, a couple other questions I wrote down. What would you tell a younger version of yourself if you were going to start over again? What would you do different?
Judith,
if anything.
I'll let you go first.
Whoa, what would I do different? That's a hard one. I think probably adopt the mantra that I've had more recently, and that's done is better than perfect. And some tasks require perfection. There's no doubt about it. All right. And I reckon I can be as perfectionist as the best of them, but I'm not going to be a perfectionist in everything. And sometimes you just got to clear the things out of your email, or you've got to get the task done. So that's certainly something that I've learned in some ways, not the hard way, but it took me a little while to learn that. Yeah.
That's a really good one. I think for me, it would be to have more confidence. You know, I was always nervous or scared to say something and felt like other people, of course, would know more than me. And, you know, most of the people around me were men. And, you know, I look back and I know I had the same knowledge base, if not more, in certain areas. And it took me a while to be the person to speak up at the table. And of course, now it's hard for me to stop talking sometimes, but, you know, it's a muscle. It's a muscle to speak up and to have the confidence to speak up. And the more you use it, the more you have it.
See, it's interesting you say that, Soni, because I sort of think, oh my goodness, how could Soni possibly have lacked the confidence to speak up? And people would say that about me too. But I found it hard to speak up early in my career and put my hand up. And you know how you were talking about the casual interactions that you have with people across institutions? I had this amazing experience when I just had breakfast before a grant review panel down in Canberra with the chair of my grant review panel, who was Doug Hilton, who's the chair, the director of the Walter Eliza Hall Institute, which is, you know, arguably Australia's largest medical research institute. And what I didn't realize was that Doug was also a member of Male Champions of Change, this big organization in Australia, where they're getting, you know, leading men are speaking out about the importance of gender equity not just from a social justice lens, but because it's good for business. And I having this break, educating me and, advocating rather than the other way around.
Uh-oh, Judith, you're freezing up a little bit.
So is that sort of conversation. Oh, I'll turn my video off. Sorry, I'll turn my video off. That might be better. It was that conversation I had with Doug that made it sort of empowered me a lot more to speak up. Yeah. Not just about gender equity issues, but just to speak up. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've all learned that along the way. Nobody can hear you unless you talk, right?
Absolutely.
And as Soni says, you can't be what you can't see. And that's why I think things like the WiLing Wednesdays seminars are really good.
Yeah, that's a great saying. I love that.
Judith, something you said about your mantra resonated with me. There was a book I read when my kids were young, and I think I was so sleep deprived, I don't remember anything about the book, but it was one of these self-help books. But the title always stuck with me, which is "Good Enough is the New Perfect." And that was the same kind of thing for me. Like, prior to kids and family, I was the one staying late and being maybe more of a perfectionist and doing the things that way I wanted to have them done. And you can't do that, as your career gets busier, your family gets busier. You can do it with certain things, but can't do it with everything. So that's been my mantra as well. Good enough is the new perfect.
It's a great title.
Yeah, we're going to have to make a slide with a lot of these things. That's great. There's a question in the chat about, is it essential to have a mentor that's specifically in your area, or would a complementary area be a good way to kind of diversify mentorship?
I think, mentoring, as we've talked about, has become more of a team sport than we traditionally think about it. And so I think you need both, a mentor, and you get different things from different people. So, some mentors, like we talked about, are more sponsors. They open the door. Others will sit there and help you chart a career path, or be your mirror, or be your sounding board. So you really need a lot of different, types of mentors as you, develop a career. I think the other piece that's really important for anybody at any stage really is knowing how to manage up. This is something that I've been struggling with for a long time, and especially now in this new position where I feel like I'm middle management. But you have mentors who want to help you, but they don't always know how to help you. So if you want to get the most out of your mentor, you have to learn how to get the most out of them. Just what is it that they need? Don't go to a meeting without an agenda, whether it's written or in your head. People are busy. They have limited time. Use what you have to say, all right, this is something that I want to learn from this person, or, get feedback on. But managing up has to be an active part of mentoring.
Absolutely.
That's so right about not going to a meeting without an agenda. It's like, don't come with a problem, come with, ideas, not fixed ideas, but, be ready to come up with some ideas for a solution.
Yeah, that's what I always tell my faculty. They know that now. If they come with a problem, they better come with a solution, or some ideas at least, because I can't solve everybody's problems. They need to participate in their everyday problems too, because they're for everybody, really. So
creating that culture around you, that's what I'm hearing.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is the hardest part of leadership?
Well,
Somebody's smiling.
As a new leader, what do you think is the hardest part?
I know. I will tell you that the hardest part for me personally is that I want to be liked, and that I'm nice, and people, especially I'm in a tough situation with tough people all around, that I don't think being nice should be equivalent to being weak, and I have tried to keep leading from the heart, people first as my approach, and it has backfired, you know, where people are like, oh, she's so nice, I can get away with this. Or, you know, of course she'll let this slide. I'm going to cancel clinic with less than 30 days notice because nobody can, you know, she's going to be okay with it. I mean, so I'm really struggling with the whole, you know, how to lead with warmth and with that kind of leading from the heart without being perceived as weak.
Yeah.
That's,
Yeah, I think you need to figure out where to draw the line on those things, and sometimes it's a little bit fuzzy, unfortunately. But I agree with you. You can't. You want to be nice and empathetic, but you just can't please everybody. Not going to happen.
I think of it as
and having those difficult conversations. Sorry, Carrie, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was going to say, this is where I put my mom hat on. And I think of, you know, like tough love, you know, you love your children, but you know, you can't let them get away with things either. So that's been my approach.
it is, you know,
That's a good one. I'll remember that when I have to have a difficult conversation.
yeah, you know,
Yeah.
we're having, you know, like we're talking about, you know, Julie's going to write a book, you know, so one of the thoughts I had was, you know, mothership as a leadership style, you know, or mom as a leadership style. I don't know how to finesse the words, but, you know, I think there's a lot to that. I
Mhm.
think women have been successfully raising families and running groups for a long period of time. And, you know, why can't that be an accepted leadership style? Carrie, you're onto something. We're going to like start to.
Yeah. I found it particularly hard being a leader in this COVID era, where you know, all the resources, certainly in Australia, we've got a you know, slightly different experience, obviously, but all the resources were sucked into keeping COVID out, right? And that was, you know, dealing with our outbreaks and stamping down, you know, that was incredibly resource intensive for us. And so then trying to get the resources and trying to manage your, you know, your staff needs beyond COVID was so difficult. And you know, it's not a case of who's burnt out, it's a case of who isn't burnt out. And how can you keep leaning on the people who aren't burnt out to help those who are burnt out when you're getting this sort of, you know, decreasing pool because of the sheer ongoing demands of this pandemic. You know, for one concrete example, hospital I work in is a dump, right? Concord is a dump. But finally, we're going to have our new Concord Cancer Centre open in 6 months' time. And we were supposed to have this, you know, new complement of new staff, and it was going to be a huge opportunity for us. Now, all that extra staffing fraction has gone because of the COVID demands on the health budget. And so, you know, COVID has influenced so much of everyone's practice around the world. And I'd be interested to hear how, you know, how it's had such demands on you folks in the US in particular.
Yeah, I mean, I think for all of us, it's increased demands on the healthcare system, on the physicians, on the support staff, on everybody. But I will say, in kind of a strange way, I think it's brought our division together a little bit more. We've had to cover for each other, help each other, you know, when people had exposures, or, you know, family members were ill, or, you know, some whole families unfortunately got COVID. So, you know, we've had to help each other a lot. And it actually, I think, has brought us closer together. Of course, we've been around a lot more closer together, although people were working from home, you know, sometimes. But I think in an odd way, it was actually sort of good for that purpose. Yeah. So you have to make good out of bad, right?
Yeah. Oh, and the working from home thing is fantastic. I mean, you know, if every physician who worked full time had a day a week, you know, working from home, how much work would they get done? It'd just be amazing.
Yeah, I think that is going to change the way we do some things, and not make it a bad thing to work from home, and be able to do, you know, a few Zooms and then get some other things done, as long as you're available by email, phone, text, whatever, airplane ride.
I agree. I think that flexibility has definitely been a silver lining for us as well. Because before, it was when you're here, even if it was during admin time, you're here on campus, but having that flexibility, especially for like myself with kids who are in and out of school and those kinds of things, it's been good. I hope it is a change that we see moving forward.
I remember.
Personally, I get a lot more done when I'm at home because I don't have people look at me every 2 seconds.
Right? Yeah.
I was just going to say to your point, Carrie, like Barbara Pro, who's now at Northwestern, but when she was at MD Anderson, she had told me about, the day really started at 7. And if people left early, if she left at 3 to pick up her kids, she was really given a very hard time, in that era back then. And, I think now with everybody having that sort of autonomy, if you will, and a little bit more protection over, like, we're all hard workers. It just doesn't have to be between 7 a.m. and 5 p.m. I mean, it can be whenever you can do it. And I think that's a really key silver lining.
Yeah. There's a question in the chat that's kind of interesting. Do you think emotional intelligence for women is different than for men?
I think so, but
yeah. I mean, and the data, there's lots of research that says it is, but I think, every woman is not the same and every man is not the same. And there are as many sort of differences across genders as there are within genders. I think sometimes the most sexist but lovely comment my husband ever gave me is he said, the reason I love you is because you think like a man. And I know, oh my God, that's so sexist, that's terrible, but hey, I'll take it. It's we're all so different. And I think, we can get so wound up over and so caught up in other people's lived emotions. I think that's what's often hard, isn't it? That sometimes we do need to sort of step back a bit. I don't know. It's just, everyone has to work out that level for themselves, don't they?
Yeah.
I don't know if there's so much differences between emotional intelligence between men and women, but I think there's definitely different societal expectations on the behavior that a man is expected to, portray in the workplace versus a female. And sometimes that can be really challenging if a woman is making tough decisions and is, seen as more forceful or confident or, short to the point, things like that. That can be seen as a negative for a woman. But if a man was doing exactly the same things, he would be seen as a leader. And there's a lot of literature that supports that.
There's a huge amount of literature, and I see that every day that supports that, but I don't really understand the reason behind that, the way that should be. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
I think you're right, Carrie, that it's a societal expectation of how people should behave, and that might be changing, and I look at, and maybe it's just changing in the pockets of people that I interact with, but, I certainly, see my junior faculty taking paternity leaves or, doing things that were traditionally considered, I don't know, less tough or less masculine. So maybe it's changing. There's probably generational and societal impact, but the people still in charge for most of it, I think the EQ is I think there's a difference, but.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, one other question. What do you do to improve your mental or physical ability to be a leader? Do you like to read self-help books? Do you like to exercise? Do you like to, what do you do to energize yourself to be a good leader?
I want to hear this from everybody on the panel.
Yeah.
I want to hear that from Anne. I see Anne's there.
I know, I see Anne as well. For me, it's honestly, it's cooking and reading about cooking, even if I can't cook. It's just looking at that was actually a huge, just a fun part of COVID, of the pandemic, has been, I've been cooking much more. And we watched a lot of Great British Baking Show, and that has been a lot of fun. And I used to do yoga much more than I have recently, but that's also been a really great relief for me in the past.
Yeah. And what about you, Carrie? What do you do?
Exercise is always a good outlet for me. I've been hit or miss during the pandemic myself, but more recently have been doing that regularly. Another thing that's been great for me is having a professional coach that has really helped me develop some leadership skills and given me some very helpful feedback and helped me be introspective on my strengths and things that I want to work on. That's been really a wonderful investment of my time that I've been really grateful for.
Yeah.
How about you, Julie?
Well,
exercise is important. Exercise is so important, but it's sort of, I noticed too, though, it's a lot easier for me to exercise now that my children are older than it is for my colleagues in the department who are still, grappling with so many additional parenting challenges that limit their capacity for self-nurture.
yeah. I'd say exercise is important for me as well, although, as you said, hit or miss sometimes, and depending on what's going on. So many late Zooms recently, that doesn't work out very well. But also I've been trying to declutter and try to clean out my office and life, and try to look toward the future and not look toward the present or the past so much.
Yeah. That is very good advice.
Anne, are you willing to share?
Sure. So I also like to exercise. The other two things, great TV. There's some really good TV, these British mysteries. I love British TV. So our family, it's a family thing. It's pathetic. We sit in front of the TV and watch a show with my 15-year-old. And it's great. And then I love to read fiction. So I listen in the car and then I read. Nancy Bartlett is my favorite suggester of great fiction. So we're always emailing, texting back and forth. Great books.
And do you find that with the TV watching and the fiction, because I love it too, but then the problem is I devour them and nothing else gets done until I finish that book, or I've, gone right to the end of the Netflix series. Once one of my teenage sons said to me, Mum, do you realize patients are dying because you're binging on Emily in Paris?
Henry won't let us binge. He's like, look, we watched a show. I got to go do my homework. So we're turning, because I'm like, let's just watch one more, come on. And he always shuts us off.
That's discipline.
Well, we've kind of hit the top of the hour. So any last words from anybody?
Thank you again.
Thank you to the whole panel. Amazing. Really inspiring. I loved hearing everybody's.
I was so nervous about this. Yeah.
Oh, it's fabulous.
I loved hearing the stories. Thank you so much, Judith and Soni, for sharing and really being inspiring for everyone listening in today. And thank you, Julie, for hosting.
Yes, thank everybody so much for participating, and it's fun. And this was the funnest part of my day today. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And
Me too.
Yeah, we'll see you all soon somewhere, somehow on Zoom or in person. So thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks,
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks to everyone who's put some lovely mentions in the chat.
Yeah, it's so nice.
And we also like to acknowledge our sponsors once again for our series. Now we're at the end of our 5 sessions, MSD and Roche, who've enabled the technology and the time and bringing everyone together. So we'd like to acknowledge them one more time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our sponsors
Thank
have
you.
been
Thank you.
absolutely amazing, in enabling us to do all this. It's just been fantastic. So I also want to say a big thank you to MSD and Roche.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.